Have you ever wanted to play God and reinvent life itself? You have? Well, your name's not Frank, is it? Greetings, my fellow ghouls and goblins. I'm Tom, and welcome to Monster Gab, where we love to talk about classic and vintage horror. And today we are going to be talking about the universal classic from 1931, Frankenstein. What can be said about this film that hasn't been said already? Well, probably nothing, but I tell you what, I love this film so much that we're going to talk about it anyway. Now, I feel like I shouldn't have to explain this to you guys, but I was talking to a friend recently about reviewing this film, and he kept referring to the monster as Frankenstein. The monster doesn't have a name, okay? He is just a creation. Frankenstein is the name of the guy who created the monster, alright? Now, I'm really sorry to those of you who already know this information, but I feel like it had to be said. It's out there, okay? It's done. Let's get on with the review, okay? So here is the synopsis then. Frankenstein, aided with his hunchback assistant Fritz, is hell-bent on reinventing life. Not reanimating life into the dead, but actually starting from scratch, building his own creature. In a nutshell, he wants to play God, okay? In order to do this, he needs material, so he steals an arm from here, a leg from there, robbing from graves and gallows, and even a brain from a medical college, until he makes his own being. But things turn out for the worse, because this being turns out to be a dangerous monster, if you like, a monster capable of brutality and murder, and inevitably it has to be put down. Well, that's the basics of the film anyway. Now, this film is ultimately based on the book written by Mary Shelley, and it does take some liberties. I mean, a lot of films that are based on books do take liberties, because what works in text doesn't always work in film. Saying that, though, this film takes so many liberties that it basically reinvents itself. It becomes its own story. Screw you, Mary Shelley, I'm going to show you how this is done. There are a lot of things in this film that have become so iconic that other renditions of the film and remakes have put those changes in their film too. In fact, they're so iconic that people actually thought that they were originally in the book, me included, because of course I watched all the films first before I read the book. But when I got round to reading it, I was very, very surprised to see that a lot of these changes weren't in there. And I read both versions of the book. You see, Mary Shelley originally had this book published in 1818, and a few years later, she revisited the book and made some changes of her own. But those changes were very, very subtle. They're not the same changes that are in this film. Now, some people will say they prefer the book. Me personally, I love the book, I really do, and I apologise to those who are fans of the book, but I love the film so much more. I love the changes that they've made in this film, I really, really do. Are you right up there? Oh, good. Right, so one of the biggest changes is to the characters themselves, if you like. The creation, or the monster, in the book develops speech, and for me, he speaks too well. I mean, his grammar's better than mine, considering the fact that he's not been on the planet that long. I mean, I know he's meant to be a superior being, but I don't know, he just talks far too well. Whereas in the film, he doesn't speak at all, he just snarls and growls, and he's less humanized, if you like. He's more of a monster, and I prefer that. I mean, after all, it's a monster movie, so yeah, I don't want him to be able to speak. I just want him to be on some kind of rampage and a dangerous creature. So I really do like that change. Frankenstein's character has gone through a lot of changes as well. Now, in the book, the reason for creating his creature are for the sake of mankind. His intentions are actually good, and it's all for the sake of medical science, until it all goes horribly wrong. Whereas in the film, he just wants to play God. It's as simple as that. He creates this being just so he can say, look what I've done, aren't I brilliant? But I love that. He's not so much evil, but he is pretty mad. And to be honest, I would say this film sets off the cliche of the mad scientist. At least I believe so anyway. Colin Clive plays the part of Frankenstein, and it is a little bit overshadowed by Boris Karloff because, of course, Boris plays the part of the monster. It's the reason why we're watching the film. But Colin Clive is fantastic in this film. There's a scene where he's told that he's mad, and you want to see the rage in his eyes. It's so intense, it's absolutely brilliant, and he comes across as quite intimidating and scary, if you like, and it's a great part of the film and it shouldn't be overlooked. But then, of course, Boris Karloff does play the monster, and wow, I mean, he's just so animated. He comes off as a real brutal beast. Visually, this film is really, really beautiful. It's very, very gothic. Of course, it's filmed in black and white, but I do think that goes with the image of the film as well, the aesthetics of it. Just things like the creature is built in a science lab that's kind of within some kind of castle walls. The science lab looks amazing too. It's got all the kind of the big cranks and levers, the sparks and things bubbling in the background while the lightning's flashing and all that kind of stuff. And it's a very, very famous scene, something that's been implemented in other Frankenstein movies. It looks incredible. I even love things like the graveyard at the beginning, where we see Frankenstein and Fritz about to rob a freshly laid corpse. The graveyard looks great with all the crucifixes in the background. And there's even a skeleton there as well. I don't know the purpose of the skeleton. Maybe it's some kind of historical artifact or something. I don't know. Let me know in the comments if you know more than I do. As far as I'm concerned, it's just there to add to the horror, and it works. It looks great, and I'm really glad it's there. But yeah, I don't know why it's there. Watching Frankenstein and Fritz robbing this grave and robbing gallows, it's just really, really morbid and macabre, and I love that. It really, really does add to the whole horror theme. You wouldn't do things like that. It's very Burke and Hare, and it is part of the story, but you actually physically watching them doing it, and they have no kind of moral fiber. I really, really love it. But let's talk about the monster himself. Now, in the book, the description of the monster is fairly vague, so in the film they didn't have a lot to work with. But what they created was probably the most iconic monster in Frankenstein history. The flat forehead, the square face, the bolts in the neck. It's the image we all think of when we refer to Frankenstein's monster, and it's all thanks to this film. Jack Pierce was the makeup artist on this film, and he was the makeup artist on a lot of monster movies back in the day, but he was renowned, according to my research, for having a very bad temper. He wasn't easy to get on with, but Boris Karloff apparently got on with him very, very well, and even helped with the design of this monster. So much so that he even removed a dental plate just to give this creature the gaunt look that he has, which I just think is brilliant. There was so much dedication. Now, I can't imagine anyone else but Boris Karloff playing the part of the monster, but according to research, Bela Lugosi was offered the role. Bela Lugosi was very famous for playing Dracula, another Universal classic, but he turned the role down, well, according to what I've read, because the monster didn't have any speaking lines, and this was a decision that he later regretted because, of course, this film became massive, didn't it? But yeah, he turned the role down. I suppose it should be said, though, that Bela Lugosi did eventually get to play the monster in one of its sequels. And Bela Lugosi also got to play the Hunchback assistant in one of the sequels too. Not Fritz, but Igor. We all know Igor. That is a real stereotype. The arched assistant Igor. He's been in so many monster movies, and I think he's even got his own film, hasn't he? Again, something that wasn't in the book. It all came from the movie franchise. Perhaps one of the most famous scenes in the film, which is kind of original to the film as well and gives it such legendary status, is where we see the creature risen into the night sky. Now, of course, the creature doesn't have life yet, but there's a thunderstorm and they need the lightning strike to spark life into the creature, and it's really, really great because, again, in the background of the science lab, you've got all the electrodes and the lightning rods going 10 to the dozen and, all that stuff going on. It's after this we see the creature slowly risen down, and we see a little bit of movement in one of his hands, and Frankenstein is so elated he just cries out, "It's alive! It's alive!" It's the most famous line in the film. It's so famous that it's been implemented in other versions of the story and remakes. It's so famous, in fact, that I was really surprised not to see it in the book. It all came from this movie. I love how elated Frankenstein's character is, actually, because in the book, like I said earlier, his intentions are good for making this creature, but he's instantly repulsed when he does so. He realizes that he's playing God and what he's done is really wrong and macabre, and he regrets his decision instantly. Whereas in the film, he's chuffed to bits. He's so happy at this creature. And in fact, it's only until the creature makes his first kill that Frankenstein realizes that he's made a monster, and he does agree that it needs to be put down, but he's very, very reluctant. And I love that. I just love how they've changed his character so much for the sake of this movie. Bearing in mind that this film only has a running time of about 1 hour and 5 minutes, we don't actually see the monster fully animated until about 29 minutes into the movie, but it's totally worth the wait. It starts off with a few eerie footsteps in the background, and we know, as the audience, we know it's him, we know he's coming into the room, and eventually a door opens and in he walks. Backwards. This is great because it just kind of adds to the suspense. You know, the audience is now on edge. We want to see the monster. And then he does turn around, and my God, does he look great. There's also a scene where the monster does eventually escape and he makes his way to a lake where he sees this little girl called Maria playing there. Now, in the book, there's a similar scene in the book, but it's not quite the same. But in the book, he's only ever perceived as a monster. All he wants to be is accepted. That's kind of the principle of the story. But he never is. He's only ever looked upon as a monster. He's hideous and no one can accept him, not even Frankenstein himself. Whereas in the movie, Maria actually does look past the fact that he's hideous and talks to him. And it's kind of a heartwarming moment in the movie. It's kind of, it kind of tugs on the heartstrings, and it makes you realize as an audience member, yes, he does want to be accepted. You know, he didn't ask to be created, and, you know, maybe there is some good to this creature after all. It's a very clever scene, and something else does happen here, but I don't really want to give away any spoilers. Now, as much as I love this film, I do have a couple of gripes with it as well. My biggest gripe is the use of the brain. So in the film, Fritz breaks into a medical college where they just so happen to have a couple of brains lying around. There's a normal brain and an abnormal brain. Now, the abnormal brain apparently belonged to some kind of criminal. He was capable of brutality and murder. The brains are kept in glass jars, and Fritz attempts to steal the normal brain, but he accidentally drops it, smashes on the floor, and it's no good. So he takes the abnormal brain instead, and it's the abnormal brain that gets used in Frankenstein's monster. The reason why I don't like this scene is because the abnormal brain is now the reason why Frankenstein's creature turns out to be a monster. Rather than the moral fibre, you know, the fact that what he's doing is wrong and macabre and evil. You know, I like to think that Frankenstein was always destined to fail. He just couldn't see it because he was blinded by madness and, you know, so excited. And it's only until he sees that his creation is a monster and goes on murderous rampages that he comes to some kind of realization. It's just a little gripe that I have with the film. I would have preferred that they just used a normal brain, but he still turned out to be a monster because what Frankenstein was doing was wrong in the first place. It's just my opinion. Another small issue I have with the film is May Clark's character as Elizabeth. Now, May Clark plays her fine, there's nothing wrong with her acting. It's the character herself that I have a problem with. I just don't feel like they used her enough. In the beginning of the film, one of Frankenstein's friends shows a hint of interest in Elizabeth, and I'm just wondering whether they could have gone with like a little side story there, like a love affair if you like, just to add a little more drama to the movie. I know it's not in the book, but then a lot of things weren't, so, you know, I just feel like they could have done something with her character and, like I said, added that extra bit of drama. But regardless of all of that though, it's still a great film. The music in the film is totally fine. It's nothing immensely special as far as I'm concerned, but it totally works with the film and it is really, really good. And I don't want to give away any spoilers like I said earlier, but this film does come to like a major climax, and it does have that cliche of the angry mob, which I really, really love. I love angry mobs in films, you know, the kind of mobs that say, we've got to kill the beast, you know, and they have pitchforks and flaming torches. I absolutely love it, and this film does have that. In fact, I'm pretty sure this film started that cliche off, but could be wrong. So if I quickly go over the pros and cons, like I said, pros are visually, it looks fantastic, you know, from all the backdrops and, you know, the graveyard, the science lab, to, you know, the monster himself looking so iconic. The acting is pretty stellar from both Boris Karloff and Colin Clive as Frankenstein. I think they're absolutely brilliant. I can't really pick any cons in the film, if I'm totally honest, other than my own gripes with the film. Like I said, the scene with the brain, and May Clark's character as Elizabeth, I just feel like they should have used her a bit more, but really, there's no major cons as far as I'm concerned. Now, if I'm going to give this film a rating out of 10, I'm going to give it a very biased 9 out of 10. I really, really do love this film so much. And yes, I love the book too, guys. I do. And I apologize if you're a fan of the book and prefer it. But me personally, in my own opinion, this is probably the best adaptation of the Frankenstein story. Now, like many good films, this movie did spin many sequels. In fact, the direct sequel, Bride of Frankenstein, is kind of considered to be better than the first, which is a rare occurrence because normally sequels aren't as good as the original, but many will say that this is better. I'm going to have to say that I disagree, I'm afraid. Not that this is a bad film by any means, but I just prefer the first one so much more, and I think it has just so much more legendary status. In the sequel, the creature does develop speech, and again, that is in the book, but I just feel like it humanizes him too much, and I prefer him to be a monster. There are a couple of other things in the film that I don't particularly like as well, but again, it's not a bad film, and I would say give this a watch too. So guys, there we have it. That is Frankenstein from 1931, a Universal Picture classic. Have you guys seen this film? What do you think? Do you love it? Do you think there are better adaptations of the Frankenstein story out there? Maybe you prefer the Hammer series. I know I love the Hammer series, but for me, this one truly is the best. What do you think of my opinion on the brain as well? Do you think that it does work well in the film, or do you agree with me? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section, guys. I really do want to hear from you. And until next time, I don't know who they are, but if you don't subscribe, they will get you. Thank you so much for stopping by, guys. I will see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye. Excuse me. Oh, I'm gonna stop drinking.